The baby was quiet. That was the worst part. A child that small should cry, fuss, make noise. Emma just blinked, slow and heavy, her little lips dry and pale as they sucked at nothing. I had no milk left. My body had stopped trying weeks ago, and all I could give her now was dampened bread and my heartbeat. The bakery smelled like heaven and sin. Warm crust, melted sugar, and cinnamon. I stood there too long, letting the scent drift over me like smoke, trying to pretend I belonged inside that world. But the truth clung to my coat, patched elbows, threadbare skirt, a shawl too thin for October. I cleared my throat and shifted Emma higher on my hip. "Mr. Olson?" I called through the cracked door. "Sir, I was wondering if you might have any ends? Anything going stale?" Henrik Olson, the baker, looked up from his floured counter. His sleeves were rolled past the elbows, exposing thick, flour-dusted forearms. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me like I was another bill he didn't want to pay. No handouts today. "Mrs. McKenna." It stung worse than I expected. "I could trade," I said quickly. "I have." I reached into the sling around Emma and gently pulled out the last soft thing I owned. "My mother knit this before she passed. It's good wool. You could sell it, maybe." Henrik looked at the blanket for a long second. Blue like wild berries, with small, even stitches. He wiped his hands, took it, and handed me half a loaf. Not even the end crust. Just half. Then he shut the door. I didn't cry. Not with people watching, but someone was watching, across the street. Standing outside the general store with a sack of seed in one arm was Jacob Thornfield. Even from a distance I knew who he was. Everyone did. The rancher with too much land and too few words. He was the sort of man you saw in church once a month, and never dared approach unless your cow was dying or your boy got into something. He shouldn't have. He didn't say anything. Just tipped his hat once, slow and deliberate. Before stepping off the porch and crossing toward me, my heart climbed into my throat. "Ma'am," he said, voice even. "May I?" Before I could answer, he gently took his hat off, knelt down, and placed it over Emma's bald little head. The brim drooped low, covering her face like a curtain. For the first time in days, she giggled. A tiny sound, like a hiccup wrapped in hope. I was frozen. "That's too fine a hat for the likes of us," I said, trying to hand it back. He shook his head. "No such thing as too fine when it's for someone in need." "Why?" That slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes met mine. Blue-gray, cold as steel, but soft around the edges. "Because I saw you trade a piece of your past to feed your child. Because no one else did anything. Because kindness don't need a receipt." He tipped his head again. "Good day, Mrs. McKenna." Then he turned and walked away like it hadn't meant a thing, but it did. It meant everything, and I hated that it did. I clutched the bread, adjusted Emma, and walked home fast, ashamed of needing help, furious that kindness could still break me, and scared of what it meant that I hadn't been able to look away from that man's eyes. The crust was soft enough to soak in boiled water. I tore it into strips and let the pieces float in the cracked bowl, the way my mother used to do during bad winters. Emma sat bundled in my lap, Jacob Thornfield's hat sagging over her eyes. She looked like a tiny sheriff, blinking through the brim, confused but oddly content. She let out a sharp little coo when the wet bread touched her lips, and I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real laugh, startled and thin, like someone else's voice had escaped from inside me. For a moment, it was almost enough. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps on the door that already creaked in the wind. I wiped my hands on my skirt and opened it without thinking, and instantly regretted it. "Sarah," came the syrup-sweet voice of Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the town's walking newspaper. She stepped inside without waiting, her eyes already scanning my tiny front room. Her dress was crisp and lavender-scented, with a lace collar that seemed too white for a place like ours. Her gaze stopped on the hat. "Well, isn't that just precious?" she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. A Thornfield hat on a McKenna child. Makes for quite the picture, doesn't it? I stepped between her and Emma. "Can I help you with something, Mrs. Patterson?" "Oh, no. Just came to see how you were faring. We've all been so worried." She placed a gloved hand on the back of my chair and leaned in. "But then I saw you out front of the bakery earlier. With him," She didn't have to say who. It was nothing, I said, jaw tight. A hat is never nothing, dear. Not from a man like Jacob Thornfield. And certainly not to a woman in your condition. I felt my face flush. Condition? She arched a painted brow. Widowed, poor, alone. It gives people ideas. I picked up the bowl and started walking toward the wash basin. Then people should get better ideas, she clucked her tongue. You're young. And desperate. And he's, well, generous. But generosity has teeth, Sarah. You should know that better than anyone. The town is talking. I didn't ask for the hat. Didn't need to, she replied smoothly. Men like him don't give without expecting. Be careful you don't end up paying a price you can't afford. That did it. Get out, I said quietly. She blinked. I beg your pardon? You came here to scold, not to help. If you cared about Emma or me, you'd bring bread instead of warnings. So unless you've got something useful in that fancy handbag of yours, kindly leave. Her face hardened. We're trying to protect you, Sarah. A woman with your reputation can't afford rumors. I don't have a reputation. I have a child and an empty pantry. That's all. Silence stretched. Finally, she turned and walked to the door, her skirts brushing past me like cold water. Suit yourself, she said, stepping onto the porch. But when the church ladies vote next week, don't be surprised if your name's not on the assistants list. The door slammed. I stood there, breath shaking. My hands gripped the rim of the bowl so tight it cracked. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rustled across the dirt like whispers. Inside, Emma let out a soft burp and grinned under the weight of Jacob's hat. And that was when I decided I wasn't going to let whispers decide who I was. If Jacob Thornfield thought that hat meant something more, I wanted to hear it from his own mouth. And if he didn't, then I needed to know that too. Because kindness without motive was something I hadn't believed in since Thomas died. But maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. I wrapped Emma tight and set out for Thornfield Ranch, 1 hour by foot. No invitation. No plan. Just questions, and a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. The path to Thornfield Ranch wasn't marked, but I knew it. Everyone did. A long dirt trail that curved past cottonwoods, crossed over a dried-up stream, and rose gently toward the horizon, like it was leading you out of the world. I walked it with Emma wrapped against my chest, wind clawing at my skirt, moonlight silvering the frost on the grass. She was asleep before we made it past the first mile, head tucked beneath that oversized hat. I kept thinking about the bakery, about the way the townsfolk looked through me like I was something sticky on the bottom of their boot, and about the way Jacob had looked at me, not pitying, not leering, just seeing. The lights were still on when I reached his front porch. A flicker behind the parlor curtains, steady and warm. I hesitated, one hand on the rough-hewn post. My pride screamed to turn around, to go home and pretend none of this mattered. But something deeper, something quieter, urged me to knock. I did. 3 times, just like Mrs. Patterson had. The door opened slowly, and there he stood. Jacob Thornfield wore no hat tonight. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hair tousled like he'd run his hands through it a few too many times. There was a fire behind him, a pot of something simmering on the stove. Mrs. McKenna, he said, voice lower than I remembered. Is everything all right? I couldn't answer at first. My throat was tight. I need to know why, I said finally. His brows drew together. Why what? I adjusted Emma, suddenly self-conscious. Why the hat? Why the gesture? Why me? He stepped aside and gestured me in. Come inside. You're freezing. I hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The warmth was immediate. It wrapped around me like the blanket I no longer had. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Jacob took Emma from me gently and laid her on a pile of folded quilts near the hearth, the hat still low over her face. She didn't stir. I didn't mean to cause you trouble, he said, turning to pour coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Didn't think that hat would stir up such a storm. I accepted the cup, cradling it for warmth. They think you expect something. That you're trading charity for company. He chuckled softly, but it wasn't cruel. I gave the hat because the baby was cold, and because I had more than I needed. That's all. But people don't give without expecting something. He looked at me then. really looked. Maybe not where you're from, but I was raised different. That surprised me. I thought you grew up around here. I did. But my mother wasn't from here. She used to say, don't give only when it's convenient. Give when it costs you something. That's when it matters. I blinked, unsure why that settled in my chest the way it did. He took a seat near the fire, one knee up, arms resting across it. I saw you trade that blanket. Saw how it broke you. Not your face, that stayed proud. But your hands? The way they hesitated, like you were handing over a piece of yourself. I lowered my gaze. It was the last thing my mama made. Before the fever took her, I figured, silence stretched, filled only by the pop of the fire. I don't know how to accept kindness anymore, I said. Not without waiting for the bill to come due. He leaned forward, voice soft. Then don't accept it. Just borrow it. Pass it on later when you can. I didn't mean to cry. The tears slipped out before I could catch it. I wiped it away fast. I came here to confront you, I said, laughing bitterly. Now I feel like a fool. You're not, he said simply. You're brave. Brave enough to come out here in the dark just to defend your name. That means something. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Stay a while, he added. Just till the baby warms through. Then I'll walk you back. I should have said no. I should have gathered Emma and gone, but I didn't. I stayed, because something in his words reminded me of the man Thomas had once been, before the drinking, before the debts, before everything turned to ash. And I was so tired of being cold, of being hard, of pretending I didn't need help. So I sat by the fire with Jacob Thornfield, drinking his coffee and listening to stories about his mother, his ranch, and the long winters that nearly broke him too. And I let myself believe, just a little, that kindness might still exist in this world. We didn't speak much on the ride back. Jacob insisted on saddling his old gelding and walking beside us, reins in one hand, the other steady on Emma's blanket-wrapped form. He had brought an extra coat for me, thick and wool-lined, with the faint smell of pine and saddle oil. I didn't ask to borrow it. He just handed it over and looked away while I put it on. The stars above us were so clear it hurt. The moon bathed everything in a silvery hush, the trees, the distant hills, the jagged wooden fences. It was the kind of night where sound carried too far and thoughts grew too loud. Emma slept, cradled against my chest, her head resting against the hat that had started all this. The brim had flopped back just enough for her soft breath to hit my skin. I'd forgotten how peaceful she could be. You always walk folks home? I asked softly, smiling. Jacob looked up from the road. Only the ones worth walking. That caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I wasn't sure if he meant it kindly or not. I decided to believe he did. We passed the dried-up creek bed, where the cottonwoods leaned in like gossiping widows. That's when I said it. I used to think love and kindness came in the same box, that if someone gave you one, the other was tucked inside. He didn't answer right away. What changed? Thomas, I said. At first he was generous. Flowers, warm hands, dreams. But when times got hard, it was like everything warm in him froze solid. Kindness turned into obligation. Love into control. Jacob didn't interrupt. I learned to say thank you like a warning, I continued, voice tightening. Because gifts came with debts. And debts? They come due. Still, he was quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind that made room for your words, instead of crowding them out. I don't want to owe anyone again, I added, more to myself than to him. He stopped walking. I pulled back on the reins and turned toward him. I'm not Thomas, he said quietly. The way he said it, not defensive, not proud, just sure, made something shift in my chest. My heart beat louder than it should have. I know, I said. A gust of wind stirred dust from the road, lifting the edges of Emma's hat. She stirred, whimpered once, then settled again. Jacob stepped closer and adjusted it gently. His fingers brushed mine. I didn't flinch. You're right to be cautious, he said. But I'm not giving out kindness to trap someone. I just saw a woman who deserved more than the scraps she was getting. My throat felt tight again. He looked at me then, really looked, the kind of gaze that strips you down to the part of yourself you try to keep hidden from the world. You deserve warmth, Sarah. Not just for your daughter. For you. It should have been too much. Should have made me retreat. But instead, it made something uncoil inside me. Something that had been wound too tight for too long. I don't even remember what it feels like, I whispered. To want something just because it's good. We were close now. Too close for decency by town standards. But nothing about it felt wrong. Then let me show you, he said, Dot, and then he kissed me, Dot. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't hungry. It was careful, like something being unwrapped for the first time. Like he was asking a question without using words. I answered. For one breathless moment, I let myself want, and when it ended, I didn't step away. I just rested my forehead against his and let the silence say what neither of us could. Eventually, we started walking again. The world was still cold, but I wasn't. Not anymore. We reached my door before the sun rose. He didn't try to come inside, just touched his fingers to the brim of his new hat, the one he'd been wearing ever since giving Emma his old one, and said, If the town talks, let them. I nodded, Dot, and for the first time in months, I hoped. Not for food or shelter, but for more. They came at dawn, like a bad dream that starts with sunlight instead of darkness. Reverend Morrison stood at the front of the pack, hat in hand, lips pursed tight beneath his bushy mustache. Behind him, 3 women from the church ladies' committee, Mrs. Patterson, of course, looking like she'd skipped breakfast just to be first in line to cast stones, Mrs. Langley, who always smelled of lemon polish and judgment, and Miss Eleanor Jibb, whose greatest talent was making charity feel like punishment. They didn't knock. They waited. I opened the door with Emma balanced on my hip, her face still creased from sleep. The Thornfield had sat crooked on her head, and when the wind blew, the brim fluttered like a warning flag. Morning, I said, flat and cautious. Mrs. McKenna, Reverend Morrison began, eyes flicking to Emma and then back to me. We thought it best to speak directly. I let the silence stretch long enough to feel like a question. Mrs. Patterson answered it for him. It's about the incident. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? The one where I fed my child, or the one where someone offered us warmth? That got a twitch from the Reverend's eye, but he cleared his throat. It's not our intention to shame you. Only to guide. For your own good. Mrs. Langley stepped forward, her mouth drawn so tight it looked stitched. People are talking. About Mr. Thornfield. About you. They've always talked, I said. They talked when Thomas drank away the mortgage. They talked when the baby cried too long. What's different now? Miss Jibb chimed in. Now they're calling you familiar, unwise, vulnerable to temptation. Because someone gave my daughter a hat? Because you were seen returning from his ranch in the early morning hours, the Reverend said, his voice suddenly sterner. My cheeks flushed. He walked us home. That's all. And yet appearances matter, Mrs. Patterson snapped. Especially for a woman of your standing. Widowhood is not a license for impropriety. I shifted Emma to my other hip, jaw tight. I've done nothing wrong. No, said the Reverend. But to prevent scandal, we recommend, for the sake of your child and your place in the congregation, that you return the hat, publicly, and make it clear there is no ongoing association with Mr. Thornfield. It felt like someone had slammed the wind out of me. The hat, that old worn hat, soft and sun-creased. It had kept my baby warm, had made her laugh, had made me remember what kindness felt like. I looked down at Emma. She blinked up at me from under the brim, her little hands curled around the edge like it belonged to her. She's 8 months old, I said, voice trembling. That hat is the only thing in this house that fits her and keeps her warm. But you'd have me strip it off her head so your roomers feel tidier? It's about decency, Mrs. Patterson insisted. No, I said. It's about control. The Reverend stiffened. We're trying to preserve your place in this town, Sarah. Your reputation. Your daughter's future. And what if I don't care about a place that only makes room when I shrink myself? Mrs. Langley drew herself taller. If you refuse, the church will have no choice but to remove you from the assistance list. You won't receive supplies. Your name will be left off the winter relief program. My knees wanted to buckle. No firewood. No food vouchers. No access to the charity doctor for Emma. I didn't speak for a long time. Then I swallowed hard and said, I'll think about it. It wasn't surrender. Not exactly. but it bought me time. The Reverend nodded, satisfied. The women turned as one, their shoes clicking like a jury's verdict. I closed the door before they reached the gate. Inside, I held Emma tight and sat on the floor. The bread was gone. The water was cold. But I still had a spine. Meant maybe, but not broken, and as the wind howled outside I began to think, not about survival, but about standing up. They wanted me to return a hat. They had no idea what I was about to take back. The coins didn't amount to much, but they jingled louder than church bells in my pocket. I left Emma wrapped tight in the cradle with the quilt tucked around her ears, kissed her forehead, told her mama had errands, told myself it wasn't a lie. The town was waking up slow. Chimneys puffed like sleepy mouths. Boots scuffed against frozen boards. Most folks turned away when I passed. Others didn't even bother. I stopped at Olson's bakery first. He barely looked up when I laid down 3 coins. For what? He muttered, dusting his hands. For last week's bread, I said. The one I traded the blanket for. He blinked. You don't owe me, I do. Now I don't. He picked up the coins and set them in the register without a word. Next, I stopped at the dry goods store. Settled the 6-cent tab for flour I'd stretched too thin over too many days. Then I crossed to the tailor's place and dropped 4 coins for the buttons Thomas never came back to fix. They'd long since rusted in a drawer, but that wasn't the point. With each payment, I stood taller. Word spread fast in a town this small. By the time I reached the livery, a few heads were poking through curtains. I didn't care. At the end of it, I had 1 coin left. I held it in my palm, like a prayer. That's when Jacob found me. He didn't call my name or approach loud. Just appeared beside me, like the wind had pushed him there. You all right? He asked, quiet. I stared at the coin a moment longer, then slipped it into my pocket. I'm fine. You looked like you were about to bury someone. I shrugged. Maybe I was. He stepped beside me, hands in his coat. Heard about the church visit. Of course you did. And? I looked at him. They want me to return your hat, publicly. Pretend it meant nothing. Pretend you mean nothing. He nodded slowly, jaw tight. I don't like being told what to do, I added. But I hate being told who I am. Jacob didn't smile. He didn't try to soothe me. He just listened, which, in its own way, was everything. I spent years disappearing, I said. First into Thomas's shadow, then into motherhood, then into debt. I forgot what it was like to be seen, without feeling ashamed. Jacob met my gaze. You're not invisible, Sarah. I know that now. But I had to prove it. Not to them, to myself. He looked like he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine without hesitation. They want to shame me into silence, I said. But I've been quiet too long. Then don't be, he said. I'm going to that Sunday meeting. With the hat on Emma's head. They'll push back, I'll push harder, he smiled then. Just a flicker. I looked up at him. I'm not asking you to fight for me, Jacob. I know, he said. But I might stand beside you anyway. That night, as the sky turned to coal and stars blinked into place, I rocked Emma by the fire, and I whispered a promise into her tiny ear. We won't hide anymore. Not from kindness. Not from hope. Not from love. Twilight was brushing the hills with gold when Jacob showed up at my door again, this time with a folded deed in his hand. He didn't knock. Just stood on the porch like he wasn't sure whether to come in or turn back. His hat was low over his brow, his coat dusted with trail grit. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I need to show you something, he said. I stepped aside, heart already sinking. Emma was asleep in the cradle, one fist curled around the edge of that old hat, like it had grown roots into her soul. Jacob walked in and held the folded parchment out like it might burn him. I've been holding on to this for a while. I didn't take it at first. Just looked at it, the weight of it, the shape of it, the quiet confession radiating off it like heat. What is it? I asked, though I already knew. It's your land, he said. Yours free and clear. I went still. I paid off Thomas's debts months ago, he continued. Before the foreclosure notice could hit your door. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I expected anything for it, but you didn't tell me, I said, voice shaking. You let me believe I was one mistake away from losing everything. You let me grovel to this town. And all that time it was already mine?" He nodded. "I thought I was protecting you, giving you time to find your footing before you had to carry the weight of knowing." I stepped back. "That wasn't your choice to make. The hurt came fast and hot. Betrayal laced with the worst kind of gratitude. I hated that my first thought wasn't relief but shame. That I felt small again, like a girl whose future had been decided behind closed doors by men with good intentions and terrible timing. Thomas used to do that," I said, quiet but hard. "Decide what I needed without asking. Wrap his control in concern." "I'm not him," Jacob said. "No," I agreed. "But right now, you're acting like someone who doesn't trust me to stand on my own." Silence fell thick between us. He didn't defend himself. Didn't offer more comfort or flowers made of words. He just stepped closer, voice low. "You're right. I messed this up. I should have told you. Should have trusted you to handle it." I looked at him, at the man who had given my daughter warmth without asking for a thing, at the man who had walked beside me when everyone else stood behind closed curtains. And beneath my anger I saw it. Not manipulation, not pride, just fear. The same fear that sat in my own bones most days. "I was trying to do right by you," he said. "But maybe what's right is just telling the truth and letting you choose." He handed me the deed. I took it. It trembled in my hands like something alive. "I don't want charity," I whispered. "It's not," he said. "It's a gift. No strings." I looked up at him then, and for the first time, I believed him. "I don't know what to do with this," I said. "Start by planting something," he smiled. I laughed, choked and teary, but real. Then I stepped into his arms and kissed him like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years. This time, I wasn't ashamed to want. This time I was choosing it. The cake was lopsided, 3 layers of sweet cornbread stacked with wildberry jam between, just the way Emma liked it. She was turning 4, though no one in town seemed to believe it. She was tall for her age, with her father's sharp cheekbones and Jacob's quiet eyes. I watched from the kitchen window as she ran barefoot through the yard, arms stretched wide like wings, Jacob's old hat flapping on her head, tied now with a leather chin strap he'd fashioned from one of his bootlaces. She wore it everywhere, school, church, even to sleep some nights. The townsfolk had long since stopped whispering. Oh, they still talked, but it wasn't about shame anymore. It was about stubborn crops that finally took, or Jacob's cattle line that somehow survived the last drought, or the bakery's new jam tarts with our name stitched into the paper band, McKenna and Thornfield. That's what folks called us. Now, partners. As if that was the plan all along. I stepped onto the porch with a pitcher of lemonade and 2 chipped glasses. Jacob sat in the rocker, watching Emma like she held the map to all the things he'd lost and found again. "She still loves that hat," I said, sitting beside him. He smiled. "Told you it was a good fit." I leaned against his shoulder. "You ever regret it?" "What?" "Any of it." He looked down at me, slow and certain. "Only that I didn't give her the coat, too." We laughed, soft and tired, like folks who finally had enough to laugh about. Emma came racing up the porch steps, cheeks flushed, holding something small in her hand. "Mama, Papa." "Look," she opened her fist. A blue button, old, worn, sun-faded. "That's from your baby blanket," I said, surprised. I thought it was gone. It was in the barn. It fell out of the hat. Jacob took it gently, turned it over in his fingers. "Must have been sewn in the lining." Emma bounced. "Can we sew it back in?" I nodded. "We'll do it tonight." She grinned and tore off again, a blur of dust and joy that the wind picked up. Jacob stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and watched her go. I followed. "You remember that day?" I asked. "When you gave her that hat?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then, it was the first time I'd seen something break and not want to walk away. I wrapped my arms around his waist, pressed my cheek to his back. "You didn't just give her a hat, Jacob. I know. You gave me a reason to believe again." He turned to face me, and as Emma danced, in the golden haze of afternoon, I thought about how far we'd come from that cold October morning. From shame and hunger and whispered judgment. From silence and loneliness. Now, I had land that was mine. A child who laughed like she knew the world would never touch her the way it had touched me. A man who didn't rescue me, just walked beside me until I found my way back to my self-dot and a hat. Still soft. Still sun-stained. Still too big. Still perfect.